right, good evening, folks. How are we doing today? Swizz here for another wonderful session. Just a couple programming notes here. I know we're supposed to have a Let's Play scheduled the last week. I'm still just trying to figure out the routine that everything's going to be. I think what's probably going to happen is that it's going to be uh, two psychoeducation, coping skill sessions here on a Monday and Tuesday. I'll do my best. And then it's going to be a kind of let's play for that Wednesday. Again, this is week two into this, so there's still a lot that I'm trying to navigate and work through. So we'll see what happens, but I'm hoping that this will be kind of a good schedule going forward with it all. I've got my own little family, got my own kind of self care I got to take care of. But I'll still try to work on trying to be consistent, I guess, with that. So, anyways, getting to kind of the meat and potatoes of our discussion here, we're going to dive into something that we might just kind of glaze over every now and then, but it's an interesting kind of conversation to have about with yourself or with other people in general, especially in kind of the tumultuous areas that we're in this day and age, right? Of kind of knowing what our values are and kind of knowing like what we represent and what we respect. Lines can be pretty blurry, especially again with kind of everything that's happening in today's world. And it's always good to be able to just kind of take those moments to think about and reflect on what is it that we do appreciate or do kind of understand with ourselves here, right? So just kind of being able to define what is a value, essentially being able to say that they're deeply held beliefs and principles that help us kind of guide us behaviors, help us kind of lead us to certain decisions and attitudes that we may decide kind of what is important to us. Think of it as kind of like a personal compass in our lives that we are directed from. And it can be hard to, as I've said, to be able to kind of know what is it that you value or what you define to be a value, especially with things that are, as we're kind of growing up, we may define kind of what a value is for ourselves to begin with. And then it turns out maybe that not so much that's not really what we believe in, right? And I like kind of having this discussion here in the beginning to really just kind of emphasize one of the biggest points I always kind of talk about with my clients. It's just about a lot of it having to do with just kind of our preconceived philosophies going into our adult life. And a lot of that is through kind of conditioned thoughts that we experience as we are growing up, right? So your parents, your guardians are providing this insight to you. Think of it as just kind of, this original blueprint of life that you have kind of starting out. And with that, you're only given that information. It's very limited, right? You don't know kind of what to expect. What you're being told is what to be the gospel truth in that sense, right? And a lot of it is really just kind of those early years are really a big framework for really defining your values to start out with. Um, and what's interesting about that is a lot of it is out of your control, especially when you have those parents and guardians in your life that are providing you of what is respect and what is family and what is the importance of a hard work in that sense, right? These certain values that a lot of it is just fairly kind of instilled with us growing up and maybe shaped or maybe fairly kind of with us throughout our whole lives there because of the fact again of the frequency of these conversations, right? So for example, if you're one of the biggest kind of things is related to family, and let's say that you grow up in a household where it's emphasized that blood is thicker than water with everything, and that family could do no wrong in regardless of whatever the behavior or circumstance, we always have to stick with family, right? That's a value that is curated kind of in a way kind of growing up. And as you get older and you get to have new experiences, maybe you go to college, maybe you start working, whatever it is, you start talking to more and more people, you start to realize maybe that value doesn't hold as much weight as it once did, right? And it's due to the fact that you're having these conversations with other people, you're talking to these individuals, and you're really just kind of recognizing, hey, I understand that this is a pretty important value to maybe my family here or my mom, dad, whoever, but it may not be as significant to me, or maybe the way I define value is different than how they define it. And that's one of the biggest things, is being able to kind of, as we go through life, to kind of shape and define what those values are for ourselves. And again, as a child, you can only do so much. You have limited information. You have that original blueprint towards your life. And it isn't until you go through those difficulties and those experiences you start to revise that blueprint more and more. So, with that in mind, it's always good to be able to kind of think about these things as we are trying to work on how to practice and understand what our values are. So, as always, I like pulling up kind of my little worksheets here. I'm just going to pull it up, make sure I got everything I need. Yes. So, give me one sec as we are fiddling with this. And here we are. Okay. So, we have our values listed here at the very top. And this is a nice little worksheet that we could do to really just kind of define what are our values, right? And what's interesting about kind of looking at this inventory sheet, right? So if you're looking at this and you're trying to be like, oh, wow, like what are the values? And there are a lot, right? What's interesting is kind of being able to define what is it exactly that you may value in life. And there's a lot on here. I didn't do an official count, but you could kind of go through the list here to pinpoint exactly, the things that you want. And with this, it's kind of a nice little activity to do, because essentially the goal for this little activity is to be able to identify what you value, right, in terms of kind of the ones here, to check off the ones that you list. And then you're supposed to be able to categorize them into 4 categories. So for example, let's say if you do balance with work, or financial stability with work, I guess, or accountability, whatever it may be, you want to lump the values that you select here into 4 different categories. And from those 4 different categories, what you want to do is to be able to pick the most value, or pick out of all the values that you have there, pick the ones that are the most important from each of those categories, right? So when you separate them, and let's say the one's the work, or one's the family, or whatever it is, you're identifying the most important one from that, and you're going to list it down here with this, right? So after you do that, from these 4 that you list, you're going to define what the 2 kind of core values are for yourself there, right? And I think that's it's going to take time, right? And obviously you can kind of pause the video or whatever it is if you're watching this, whether live stream. I know you may not be able to pause it, but when you look at the recordings later, being able to pause the time and write it down is it's going to be the key, right? And these sort of exercises, again, it really comes down to being able to just take that time for yourself. And it can be hard, right? Especially with how busy things are here and there in life, with job, work, families, whatever it may be. It's a lot. It's a lot to do. It's a lot to take that time for us. But the more that we're able to just kind of sit and think and process, we will make these impacts here. So yeah, like I said, just kind of it's an area that we don't really think about or process too much, but the more that you just kind of reflect on it, the better and more impactful it may be, right? So like I said, just to kind of recap for this little assignment, you go through the list, you pinpoint the ones that you feel resonate with you, and through that you put them in all categories, and through those categories you pick out the top 4, and from those top 4 you pick out the top 2, and those are defined as your core values, something internally you just truly identify and relate to, that this is who you are as a person, right? Nothing can change, because this is it. This is what I respect. So your core value might be something like Some people it may be career, right? Other people may be adventure or ambition, or even just kind of humor, right? Being able to kind of figure out what that core value could be good and could be helpful to steer those kind of conversations that you're looking for. So, kind of a short topic of conversation here. It's definitely more that self-reflection one. But like I said, I think what's important to kind of emphasize is that um, your values, what you start out with, is not going to be defined for the rest of your life. They can change, they can alter based on your life experiences, based on your conversations that you have with people. And just know that if you feel that it's hard to escape from that, it's going to take time, right? I always like to just kind of bring up the classic kind of behavioral example of conditioning, Pavlov conditioning, right? The more exposure that you've gone into of, let's say, this particular value, the more of that it's going to ring true to you. And it's just we're essentially trying to break that particular conditioning and experiences that we've had and introducing new information. And that's just going to take time. But the more that we do it, the more consistent we are, the more vigilant we are at trying to make those adjustments, we will see that change that we're looking for. So, hopefully, this was a helpful conversation here. I wish you the best on your mental health journey here, and hopefully, this is another tool in your tool belt. But thank you all for joining, and yeah, I hope you had a wonderful evening here tonight. Thanks.